Well, hi everybody, Father Alex here. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. My guest this week on the Godcast is Bishop Anne Hollinghurst. Bishop Anne is the assistant bishop in the Diocese of Lichfield, and she is also the principal of the Queen's Foundation. So I do hope you enjoyed this interview. If you do, then please do check out others. Perhaps follow me on Twitter at AlexDJFrost or subscribe to the YouTube channel. But for now, I hope you enjoy this interview with Bishop Anne Hollinghurst. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Bishop Anne Hollinghurst. Bishop Anne is the assistant bishop in the Lichfield Diocese, and she's also the principal at the Queen's Foundation. Bishop Anne, it's fabulous to get you on the Godcast. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Alex, and thank you very much for the invitation.
That's great to get you on. It really is. And let's start with Queen's Bishop Anne. You've been enrolled for your first full academic year. Has it lived up to expectations? Just tell us a bit
Well,
about those early months.
yeah, I mean, I'm still travelling through my first year. I really took up role in October. So it has been an exciting year. I've never been quite sure what the rhythm of the next term's going to hold. Obviously, teaching has now stopped, but of course, it's still a busy old time for the staff, trying to do all those things you don't get time to do whilst term is in full swing. But good, very good to have landed here, and I have done so with a deep sense of vocation.
Right. For quite a lot of people who follow the Godcast, Bishop Anne may not be familiar with the Queen's Foundation. So just give a bit of a flavour of what Queen's is and what its aims are.
Yeah, sure. Well, the Queen's Foundation is quite an extraordinary thing, really. It is an ecumenical theological college, but it's more than a college. We have just under 300 students signed up with us currently. About 40% of those are on campus regularly. Sorry, it's the other way around, is it? About 40% are hardly ever, if ever, on campus because we have a wide reach. We have global connections, and we have online supported, but online learning as well. Its history is that it was one of the first Anglican theological colleges outside Oxford and Cambridge to be set up in the 1800s. It's actually one of the founding institutions that part of it went on to become Birmingham University. But over the years, the journey Queen's has travelled has made it very much an ecumenical foundation, particularly a partnership with the Methodist Church, which came into being in the 1970s. But we have broad interdenominational representation here, and to my delight, a growing partnership with the Black majority Black Pentecostal churches, particularly through the work of our Centre for Black Theology. So we continue to train those for ordained ministry in the Methodist and Anglican Church and others, but we have a lot more going on beside, right through from the kind of, get a taste of theology, non-accredited, dip your toe in kind of discipleship opportunities for study and learning, to particular programs that are about developing particular aspects of people's ministry, lay and ordained. We actually have a thriving research department with a little under 50 students studying for PhDs. So there's a lot going on, Alex, a lot going on.
I would imagine that rich kind of cultural heritage and different flavors of different denominations can lead to some quite sparky debates and conversations. It's very unique, isn't it, in that regard, as far as theological colleges go. What do you think is the real blessing of that diversity of community?
Well, interestingly, we've just had our annual foundation event at which we mark all the achievements of our students who are leaving in particular. And one of the things so many of them say in their testimonies is about what they valued is the interdenominational context in which they've learned. Now, obviously, for Anglicans or indeed for Methodists, there is particular formation within their tradition. So the Anglican students do meet together on their own for Anglican formation. We do that as well. But I think it is that encountering of the other with maybe different approaches, different ways of expressing Christian faith, and being open to learn from them, as well as to share one's own story and tradition and theology. And I've heard certainly many of the Anglican students say that they leave Queen's feeling so much broadened in their understanding of global Christianity, actually, but of the different traditions, and understanding more about their own tradition in Anglicanism because they have actually encountered that difference as well. So, of course, it does lead to some lively discussion. But I think, given that we live in such a diverse world and in this country, an increasingly diverse society, multicultural and as well as interdenominational, actually training for ministry in that environment of difference, I think really equips people for ministry in the real world.
Yeah. And I don't know if my private member's motion has been a help or a hindrance in this regard. We talk about the different theologies, but there's also the different styles and ways of learning and that I've raised. I'm just wondering how if you have addressed that, or as the formational training changed over the time, or is there work that you'd like to see in this area, Anne?
Yeah, and just to say, first of all, as I think you know, Alex, I was one of those who warmly welcomed your motion in Synod. I think we had a really good debate around it, and it was really good to see that affirmation of wanting to widen access, in particular, to those from more working class backgrounds, because we want the gifts of all God's people, and we want every individual to flourish and become more and more who God has made them to be. So I really welcomed your debate. I think that the picture is quite a hopeful one overall. I mean, I guess it's mixed. I can speak for Queen's, but I think generally my experience and knowledge of theological education establishments is that there has already been quite a distance down the road travelled to recognise the importance of different approaches to teaching, to learning, the different kinds of support different people from different backgrounds might make, more awareness of the context of the curriculum. I mean, speaking from Queen's point of view, I think it's one of those areas where we're all aware one wants to continue to improve in. But I think one of the reasons I felt really drawn to Queen's is I had some experience from the other side of the fence, so to speak, as sponsoring bishop in my previous role, and seeing some of the fruits of those who trained and studied through Queen's, including many who had come from estate backgrounds in Birmingham and the West Midlands. So we do have a really mixed and diverse group of students here in every respect, and that does include backgrounds, educational backgrounds. And there is a lot of learning support in place. And I think that is the key, actually. It is enabling each individual to feel that they belong, that the context is one where they fit, where there is support available to them. I mean, that might just be something very practical, that they haven't, if it's a written assignment, they haven't done any writing for a very long time. So we have writing mentors to support them, but we have mixed modes of assessment. So there will be assessed conversations, there will be portfolios, there will be presentations. There's a wide diversity already of assessments. And I think also, and again, this is something particularly at Queen's, a real paying of attention to context. And that applies through everything that we do here, but it's recognizing there are many different voices and they all have something to say about God and the reality of who God is, the amazing creation we live in, the mystery of other human beings and of ourselves. And everyone has something to bring to that table, and to be aware of context and not privileging a particular voice, whether it's in the more academic kind of content of courses or in the way that teaching and learning has happened. I think it's paying attention in a very intentional way to that kind of thing, as well as the support that's in place. So, as I say, I know that's not just true of Queen's. So I do think there are, it's a very different time now to, for example, 30 odd years ago when I was in initial ministerial training, which I loved. I got a lot out of, but things have changed hugely. But there's further to go. And certainly in terms of the Church of England, we have not been good historically at welcoming, identifying, nurturing vocations from more working class backgrounds. And that doesn't just apply to ordained vocations, of course, that's across the board.
And could I ask a little bit about your own vocation? And if I may, it's quite a big thing, isn't it, to move from the role of a bishop? Not that you're no longer a bishop, you know where I'm going with this, but
Yeah. I'm not a jobbing bishop, yeah.
or, yeah, to move into a principal of a foundation, was that a difficult thing for you to do? Was that a challenge, or did you just feel that God was completely in this?
Yeah, no, thanks, Alex. It is a big transition in many ways, and obviously I've been aware of that. I think in other ways it felt like a very obvious and natural step for me once God opened me to the thought that God might be calling me to this role. And I think that's because throughout my ministry, really, as deacon, priest, and bishop, the beating heart of that in many ways has been this passion for developing people, for nurturing vocations, for developing people's ministries, seeing people flourish. And that's something in different ways I've done throughout my ministry. And I've kind of dipped my toe into educational worlds at different points of that. I was a chaplain at the University of Derby several lives back now, and teaching in the religious studies department there. So I think as I started to hear God speak to me for quite a long time, actually, that there was something fresh maybe for this next season, I guess I was open to that. So when this opening at the Queen's Foundation came along, to be honest, I was so busy bishoping, I didn't even realise it. Someone said to me, "Do you know they're advertising for a new principal?" I remember saying, "No, well, no, I don't actually." Um, and I guess it was after two or three people kind of tapped me on the shoulder and just said, "Have you thought about this for yourself?" And when two or three people do that, all independently, you start to think, maybe God is trying to get through to me just a little bit here. And it really was a case of, as I began to explore and look at what Queens were looking for their next season here, and to talk to people, I realised there might be something of a fit here. So it's very much a vocational decision. It's been a wonderfully invigorating year, and obviously, as you say, whilst the day job is now principal rather than jobbing bishop, obviously I have entered this calling with a sense of all I bring in terms of my episcopal calling as well, which is about a deep care and concern for the formation of both disciples and ministers for God's church. And of course, when I say God's church, I mean all the denominations across our country and beyond. So in a sense, it still feels a very episcopal role because it is actually about nurturing the vocations and helping to equip those to serve the church and the world.
I think vocation, the word vocations, I find fascinating. As a jobbing vicar, sometimes people suggest things or moves, and I generally look to God to see if God's calling me to maybe something else. And sometimes things have been put before me, and I've thought, well, I just don't think God's in this. And I think and also I have the blessing of being a vocational advisor for the diocese as well, and seeing people where you really sense that real strong sense of vocation, and sometimes less so. And I think in Lancashire we perhaps struggle to recruit more than in other places, and some places have got like a queue of 12, 15 people for one role, all saying that God's calling them to that place. How do we really dig into what vocation is? And I don't know if that's too deep a question for 10:30 on a Monday morning, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts were.
I think it's a brilliant question. I mean, your insights are as valid as mine here, Alex. So let's talk about it. Let's think about it. I mean, first of all, I do find it very curious that God seems to be calling a lot more priests, for example, to the south of England than the north of England. I do find that quite curious. So that's one to take up with God as well. Um, but I think it is a mixture. I mean, I think what you've described already is actually very helpful. Um, because when we're talking about vocations to particular ministries within the church, it always has to be a meeting, I think, between the sense of of call of the person, but also, of course, the call of the church. And I guess that's where being open to the surprising call is an important part, I think, of being open to God's call upon our lives. Because there are needs across our land, as we know, in all sorts of ways, for all sorts of people with all sorts of gifts, and being open to that. And that's where maybe something, it's a word that's a kind of fallen out of popularity quite a lot, I think. But I think this is where something of the more Catholic sense of obedience within vocation comes as well. But certainly that sense of whether it's a new calling that surprises one, but one is willing to just go with it because this feels a step you have to take in saying yes to God, whether it's that or whether it's something that quite quickly feels just a really good fit for all sorts of reasons, both the kind of person you are, the kind of experience you bring, whatever it is. I think it has to be that sense of meeting of the needs of the world of the church, and the sense of the call and the gifts of the individual. It can sometimes happen quite quickly. Sometimes discernment is quite a difficult process, and I know you will have accompanied lots of people through that process, indeed, as have I. And sometimes it can take quite a while before that kind of penny drops, that moment of aha. And when that happens, and when you're accompanying people and you can see that happening, it's pretty wonderful.
It
I mean,
is.
has that been something of your experience? I know you're supposed to be interviewing me, not you, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, yeah, I just agree. Well, I can go with what you've said, really. I think when you meet somebody, or you hear something, or you experience something, and the penny drops, then I just think, well, that's the God moment. I think we're all guilty of sometimes missing those God moments, aren't we? We kind of so busy in our activities and lives that we think, oh gosh, I should have spotted that sooner rather than later. But yeah, I think. I'd like
Yeah.
to see people really kind of think, God's right in this. And I think we lose it a little bit by so many people are, migrating south, for example, rather than coming to the wonderful north of England.
Indeed. Well, as a northern lass, I'm from Lancashire originally. I quite agree with you.
Oh, where are you from? Where?
Well, my mother actually, mother's family were from the Blackburn kind of
All
area,
right. Okay.
but I grew up more in the kind of the Liverpool
Right.
area, the coastal
Yeah.
strip there.
Lovely.
But I think there is something. I think what you've just nudged for me further is something further I'd want to say. I think we have often lost something of the appetite for risk taking in the church,
Mm.
and I think stepping out in faith when it isn't all clearly mapped out in front of you, or it doesn't necessarily seem the most sensible thing to do from a financial point of view or whatever. I think that is something we have lost. And I think I've observed that both as a sponsoring bishop working, with ordinands, as well as more generally. So I think, how do we encourage and nurture disciples and ministers
Yeah.
who are still up for that kind of
Yeah.
saying yes to God when it isn't all mapped out before them,
No.
and it might not be the most obvious choice other people are expecting them to make?
Yeah. And that makes it really exciting. That for me, that makes it really exciting. Now, listen, Bishop. Now, people will be thinking, "Oh, this is all very nice, Father Alex asking lovely questions," and it's becoming increasingly more difficult for me to get Church of England bishops to come on the Godcast. God knows why, but there are, the wider church, and it's not been without its struggles over the last few years, and I wonder where you feel, or where you would like to see the church kind of um, focus its energy to kind of bring some much needed stability to the church at this moment in time. I just wondering what your thoughts are.
I think we have been traveling through very anxious times, anxious and uncertain, as well as, of course, we have to name it, quite a lot of division in the church. And we are still working through that. I think I see some signs of hope, but I think we have some way to go. I think we have And obviously, I'm talking now from a Church of England perspective. And obviously, here in my current role, I've learned to think much more broadly from the perspective of many denominations. But I think as the Church of England, we do have some trust to make up. I say that, but actually, what I also observe, and I'm sure you do, is that at local level, which I always say is where the real blessedness and grit of the Church of England, is at work and evident. At local level and in our parishes, even though it's hard work, even though I know, there are many clergy who are finding the demands of ministry huge, I still think locally there is significant trust in the local church because that's where relationships are built. You meet real people. I think the national kind of conversation that the Church of England has been having is where we have got quite a lot of trust to make up. Having said that, I know some of my dear, Methodist colleagues and other here at Queen's say to me, all the denominations, of course, have their issues and have their disagreements. The thing about the Church of England is because we remain the established church, we, of course, have all our disagreements and debates in public. So it's not easy to do the difficult conversations or the thinking together without that being suddenly posted all over social media, for example. And I suspect that might be one of the reasons that increasingly leadership, individuals, others are perhaps more careful, But we have to have those difficult conversations and we have to find a good way of having them. And we have to rebuild that trust.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. One of the frustrations I have with bishops, whilst having a huge amount of empathy and compassion for what sometimes seems like a poison chalice. You're often damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. But I think sometimes there is too much silence. And what you just said there, people do need the courage to speak out, whether it's on matters of safeguarding or LLF, which is living in love and faith for people who aren't familiar with that term, or whether it's something I've been engaging with, ketamine and grooming. I think I suppose the question I'm looking for is do you think we're right to expect more from bishops, or should we be prepared to just see bishops as a kind of a quiet, prayerful leader in the background?
I think we should expect courageous moral leadership, not just from bishops, actually, but to all who own the name Christian. But obviously, bishops have a particular public-facing role. I think it's how you show that courageous and moral leadership. Now, I don't think it'd be appropriate to go into naming names here, but I would just like to say I do see some of my Episcopal colleagues speaking with courageous moral leadership. And I know privately that they get a lot of flack for that. But they know that that's part of the cost, part of the price of leadership. I think sometimes those in leadership, you're probably aware of this from your own leadership in the parish. You are aware of things that not everyone is aware of. And therefore, it's not quite as straightforward as to come out with something that might sound like a good soundbite. It might sound like this is an example of good, courageous moral leadership. But actually, the situation or the background situation is so complex that trying to find a way to speak truthfully into that, to handle a situation well, but to do it with compassion, courtesy, kindness, and nuance, can be a tricky line to tread. And maybe sometimes that's interpreted as silence, whereas actually bishops and others might be giving very helpful leadership, but more quietly in the background. But I think it's both and, Alex. Certainly, I hope all bishops are or should be prayerful and have their quiet moments and their deep calling out to God for our church and our world. So I think all courageous moral leadership arises out of that deep life, that deep inner life of prayer with God. But I think, well, a bit like right from Ecclesiastes, isn't it? There's a time to speak and a time to be silent. And I think there is wisdom in discerning which. Whether bishops always get the wisdom right on it, yeah, I think I would agree with you there. It's often a hard call.
I think I was thinking about this last night, and I think there is good news to be preached, isn't there? For us, and that is the message of Jesus. That is the good news. But you know, we are heavily weighted by a lot of bad news in the church, and I think something like LLF is an Achilles heel for us, and it's something that you've been involved with. Do you? As a bishop, as a Christian, as somebody who represents Queens, who is generally regarded as an inclusive theological place of education, do we have to sometimes think, well, we're gonna get to a point where somebody's not going to like what we do, but we have to do it? Do you think we sometimes are? I suppose wishy-washy is the question. Do we sometimes have to just say this is what's happening because this is what Synod says has agreed to, therefore it has to happen, and by it not happening, it becomes an Achilles heel for ever and ever. I'm just wondering what your thoughts.
I mean, on that particular issue, I do feel we have got very bogged down. I hope we will see some progress soon. It's one of those areas where we are clearly never all going to agree. And you probably know my views on this. I am absolutely for enabling those of different views on this to find a way of living together in the same church. But I think personally, some of the provisions, therefore, around conscience, and I think which were originally talked about in General Synod, that nobody who cannot accept for reasons of their own integrity, the developments of the prayers of love and faith are not going to be forced to use them. I think for me, where we have got really stuck is in discussions of what kind of structural provision. And I'm not quite sure where that's going at the moment. You and I might find out more as we travel this next year through General Synod. But we do have to find a way forward, because I think certainly the sense I have is that there are many, many just ordinary Anglicans getting on with the day-to-day business, as you say, of proclaiming Jesus, living out the good news in their local communities, who just want to see us move forward on this. This is all very debilitating for our mission. If there are some who, at the end of the day, feel that they cannot be in relationship or communion, I don't know what language they might choose to use, with a church that has already declared, as you say, through its General Synod meeting, that we want to take steps forward on this, then I really find it quite hard to see what else we can do but honour the decision that we do need to go forward, but we need to do that respectfully, honouring those who are of a different persuasion and integrity. But I personally think that strong provision for conscience is where I would want to see things going. I don't think that's any surprise to anyone. I think that's probably been my position throughout. But it is deeply damaging to the mission of the church, Alex, and to the morale of clergy and lay ministers generally. And it is my fervent hope and prayer that we will find, well, we will find a way through this. Sometimes I know this is frustrating, and particularly for those, from the LGBTQ plus community who have just been waiting so long to see some kind of steps forward in this area. There is a sense which church history teaches you to take the long view, and frustrating as it is, sometimes we have to do that, and we just have to keep on patiently, courteously, but determinedly, where we do believe the Holy Spirit is leading us forward.
Yeah, fabulous. I agree with everything, and it probably doesn't surprise you. But let's just—it's been wonderful talking to you on the Godcast. And yesterday I returned after holiday to church, and we had a family service that my colleague was leading, and she openly invited people to say one thing that they felt blessed about. And one of the things that I really feel blessed about being a Christian and being the leader of St Matthew's is the diversity of that church. It's become a real multicultural environment. I look around and think this is just fabulous. What would you say, and as a final question, is a real blessing for you at the moment? Where are you really feeling the Spirit moving in the fruits of your ministry at this moment in time?
Well, I find being here at Queen's a very joyful and refreshing experience. And I think very early on, thinking back to my first few weeks here back in the autumn, I remember being moved to tears several times in the college chapel here by the worship that was being led by our student teams, by mixed interdenominational teams of students leading worship, learning to give little sermons and homilies. Um, and they were clearly blessing each other through that. And I have to say, they blessed me. And so I guess for me, it is just a small taste in a little way of what the body of Christ should be, with all the tensions, all the differences that we have to respect. And, we definitely do bump up against that at Queen's. We definitely do. We have all views represented here, including, let me say, the more conservative ones, just helpful to say that. But that sense of seeking God together. That is blessing my ministry currently. And I have to say, I am learning that from many of our students. Whatever they might be learning from me, I'm learning a lot from them.
Well, and it's been a joyful discussion. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. If people out there have enjoyed this, there are lots of interviews with other bishops in the Church of England and archbishops, and lots of other people from all walks of life. But for now, Anne, thank you so much for coming on the Godcast. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alex. Been a joy talking with you too.